Okay, I think we can start our event now. I would like to very warmly welcome everyone who has joined our conference today. Thank you for your interest in our event, and thank you for your interest in our research, and also thank you for joining us. My name is Bulcsú Hunyadi. I'm a senior analyst with Political Capital, which is a policy research institute based in Budapest, Hungary. And we are assembled today to present to you the findings of our new research, which is about the narratives of the populist and radical right forces around the COVID-19 pandemic during the first wave in the Visegrad countries. We will present now the findings, and the report will soon be published, and we also send the report to you once it's ready. And we have a group of people with us today. First of all, we have here Tony Skoric, who representing the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, which is the foundation which kindly supported our project. We are very thankful to them for this, and we're very happy about the cooperation. And we also have two speakers with us today, Roman Mata from the Czech Republic and Grigory Meshcheznikov from Slovakia. They represent two of our three partners who helped us with this research, with the report. Roman represents the Institute for Politics and Society, while Grigory is from the Institute for Public Affairs in Slovakia. And unfortunately, we have to miss our Polish partner, the Institute of Social Safety, who could not be represented at our event today. Before handing over the floor to Tony for the opening remarks, I wanted to quickly update you on some technicalities. All the participants are muted and your cameras are turned off. However, you can, of course, pose questions to the speakers, to us. You can use the Q&A function in the Zoom platform. And the urgent questions of understanding will be answered on the spot. Hopefully, we will realize that there are some questions. Otherwise, all the other questions will be answered in the dedicated Q&A session at the end of the evening. And so now, Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bulcsú, and good morning from Prague, everyone. Allow me to start by thanking Political Capital and Bulcsú Hunyadi for organizing this event. We are very glad that we can cooperate on this project, dealing with such an important and unfortunately, I have to say, a very relevant topic. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, FNF is a political foundation in Germany devoted to the promotion of liberal principles and to political education. The foundation is active in over 60 countries around the world. And our project office in Prague covers the region Central Europe and the Baltic states. With these project countries, FNF offices work to support human rights, rule of law, and democracy, and the foundation also seeks to foster both international and transatlantic dialogue through conferences, study tours, and publications, among other means. I'm currently also working on a human rights project with human rights defenders across Europe. And one of the questions we are trying to answer is how to counter the populist narrative of scapegoating. And by reading examples of scapegoating from different countries, I could see very similar patterns in terms of wording, smear campaigns, and narratives which are being used to discredit, in most cases, minority groups in our societies, like ethnic, racial, religious, or sexual minorities. It is also worth noticing that these populist and far-right narratives are sometimes being used to distract the public attention from an economic crisis, corruption problems in the country, or mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, I hope this research, which is going to be presented today, and today's discussion will help us, among others, to recognize those patterns and help us to better assess if societal and government responses to the spread of the coronavirus are proportionate, necessary, and non-discriminatory. On a more personal note, I believe that no matter what theory or findings we might believe when it comes to the global spread of the coronavirus, this does not excuse us from responsibility to be considerate towards each other, respect each other's personal space, and to prevent possible health damages to the people around us. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. I hope you will take something with you from today's findings and use it in your work. And with that, I'm handing back over to Bolcho.
Thank you so much, Tony, for your kind words, and again for your support. We really very much appreciate that. And so I again share my screen and present you very quickly the agenda of our meeting. Our next agenda point is the presentation of the research finding, which I'm going to do in a few seconds. After that, we will have the discussion with our esteemed guests and partners, and after that, there will be the Q&A session I mentioned already. So I'm now starting presenting the research findings. As I mentioned, in the research, with the help of our national partners, we investigated the narratives around the COVID-19, especially by far-right and radical right political actors. These actors, in some cases, are governmental actors, are governing parties. In some other countries, these are mainly represented by fringe actors. However, in all of our countries, there are also radical right parties and sometimes also extreme right-wing parties in the national parliaments. But some countries, these are more mainstream or have more influence on the society. In some other countries, their influence is much limited. Of course, while we focused on the narratives, we also took a look at the contextual circumstances, the political circumstances, and also the policy initiatives. But now, today, we're going to focus on the narratives. And as I mentioned, we investigated the 4 Visegrad group countries, namely Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovakia. And very importantly, we only looked at the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. So from around beginning of March until the end of August, it mainly had a kind of technical reason. We had some time to kind of finish our research activities and go over to writing the report, and also we had some other events, workshops already. So that's why we had to kind of choose to focus on the first wave of the pandemic. However, in our discussion today, we also, of course, will talk about the differences between the first wave and the second wave, and how things have evolved or changed since the first wave, and what can we see now. So we found 6 main narratives, or if you want 6 main narratives. One narrative is a bit related or under categorized or subcategory probably of another one. And one of the main narratives was the anti-West, anti-democracy versus the pro-East and pro-autocracy narrative. Related to that, we found an anti-democratic, anti-opposition narrative as well. That was another main narrative, according to which the pandemic is a tool of global control. We also found an anti-vaccine narrative and an anti-migrant narrative, and then also there has been a narrative that the pandemic is not happening at all. And now I will briefly present each narrative a bit more in detail. So the first main narrative we found says that the West, or that the countries of the West, democracies of the West, have actually failed in dealing with the crisis, with the pandemic. And the EU, for instance, and the European Union didn't really succeed in providing sufficient help to their member states. And some then concluded that it's about the model of democracy, the function of democracy, and it proved to be incompetent to deal with such a huge crisis as a global pandemic. Compared to that, some people said that Eastern countries, particularly Russia and China, these countries that have an authoritarian system, could be much better at handling the situations. And they also provided help to the EU. And that's why they also concluded that the authoritarian system in general is superior to democracy when it comes to crisis situations. We found these narratives present in all four countries. However, there's an interesting and important difference. In Hungary and Poland, we found that besides fringe political actors and media platforms, also mainstream political actors spread this narrative, also including parties that are in government in these two countries. In the Czech Republic and Slovakia, on the other hand, it was mainly fringe political, social actors and also disinformation platforms that promoted this narrative. And as what I mentioned, we found the kind of related, sub-related narrative, the anti-democratic, anti-opposition narrative, which actually was about that governing parties, mainstream political parties, try to exploit the pandemic to weaken their opposition and also to weaken democratic institutions. We found this narrative most prevalent in Hungary. This spread mainly by the government, of course. In Hungary, the government mainly accused opposition parties and opposition politicians of hindering the suspected protection of the people, and also accused opposition-led municipalities of being the hotspots of the virus. And also, there was a narrative according to which anti-government protests break protection measures, and that's why people who protested against the government, for instance, for corruption, alleged corruption cases, they were fined by the police, even though all these the protests were actually COVID safe. The second main narrative we found says that the pandemic is a tool of global control and the virus was created intentionally in laboratories. Some say in China, some others say in other countries such as the US, and that was then brought to China. And the intention behind creating the virus was first to dismantle personal freedoms and or to gain control, for instance, by the vaccination, by inserting nanochips in people, and or to gain political or financial power. And there's a difference among the countries, what kind of these actors who spread this narrative say who are behind kind of this plot. In Poland, there was a kind of wide range of actors suspected behind the pandemic, like, for instance, the Jews, billionaires, Bill Gates, George Soros, or even China. In Hungary, similar pattern, but also the WHO, Bill Gates, George Soros, and some other actors. In Slovakia, the main kind of actors, or the main perpetrators behind the plot were supposed to be banks and financial institutions. And interestingly, in the Czech Republic, a very strong narrative said that it was the US and some other secret societies which aimed at redeploying the US Army to the Russian border, and the pandemic or the virus was actually only to camouflage this kind of efforts of the US administration of secret societies within the US. In most of the countries, or actually in all of the countries, this narrative was spread by fringe political actors or extreme right political actors and fake news sites, like in LSNS in Slovakia. The third main narrative we found is the anti-vaccine narrative. It's very much, of course, related to the previous narrative. It's kind of also a sub-narrative of this one. This narrative says that it's mainly the pharmaceutical industry which is behind the virus to gain profit or to control the population, again, with vaccines or nanochips. And this kind of special narrative, anti-vaccine special narrative, was found in 3 countries, in Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. And while in Hungary it was like small fringe actors and platforms, in Slovakia and Poland, it was parties also represented in the national parliaments, and also in Poland, the ruling party, at that time the presidential nominee of this party that spread this narrative. The fourth main narrative we found is the anti-migrant narrative. It actually said that the virus is very much related to migration, and it's actually the migrants who can be mainly accused of spreading the virus, and the migrants pose a huge threat to public health, and that's why migration has to be stopped. Again, this narrative was most prevalent in Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. And while in Hungary, it was also the government which kind of was the leading disseminator of this narrative, of course, also supported by fringe actors and far-right actors. In Slovakia and Czech Republic, there was mainly fringe parties that spread this narrative. In Czech Republic, there was an interesting element to it, again, a kind of a nostalgic element that border guards should be brought back and deployed again at the borders of the Czech Republic. And also, of course, kind of related to this, there was also the accusation that the pandemic is only camouflage of the migration to Europe, and that migrants also spread the virus kind of intentionally. And the fifth main narrative we found said, or is kind of a virus skeptic narrative, saying that the pandemic is not happening, either that it's not happening at all, or this narrative relativized the pandemic, saying that there are actually other diseases that have much higher fatality, and the coronavirus is not that deadly at all. So we don't have to introduce such strict measures because it's not kind of the end of the world. This narrative was mainly present in 2 countries, in Poland and Hungary. And in Hungary, it was mainly fringe far-right actors that spread this narrative in the first wave. That's pretty important. In Poland, it was the Konfederacja party, which was amongst the main disseminator of this narrative. These are the main findings of our research, and now I'm stop sharing my screen. And now I can't see any urgent questions in the Q&A box, so I'm switching over to the discussion part of our event. And again, I'm very warmly welcome the representatives of our 2 partners, Roman Maca, who is an analyst with the Institute for Politics and Society in Prague, the Czech Republic, and Grigory Meshcheznikov, who is the president of the Institute for Public Affairs, and who is joining us from Bratislava, Slovakia. What do you think, Roman and Grigory, based on these narratives we have seen were spread in the first wave of the pandemic? what has changed in the second wave? We know, of course, that the second wave of the pandemic has hit our countries much more seriously than the first wave. In the first wave, I think we can say that all our countries remain more or less safe compared to kind of numbers in some Western European countries, such as Italy, for instance, France. But the second wave has really hit hard our countries, and we kind of produce high or have produced high numbers. Of course, there is some differences among our countries, but still, the situation is much worse now in terms of, the health situation. So how do you see, how has the narratives reacted to this situation? What has changed in terms of narratives? Roman, could you please start?
So thank you, and good morning, everyone. What has changed? I would like to say that 1 or 2 or 3 weeks ago we were in a really bad situation with the highest numbers in the world, but now situation is getting better, but we still have high numbers of coronavirus cases. But you know, during the whole pandemic, these conspirators, they changed their agenda. They started with narratives that virus is like a biological weapon and to kill all the people, or at the same time they told us that the pandemic does not exist. Yeah, so at the same time they used both of these variants. Then we went through the 5G wave, yeah, that coronavirus is transmitted via 5G network. So it was in the period April and May. It was when you know, the beginning stuff to indicate the pandemic, it is like a biological weapon, it doesn't exist. So I think it is already gone, but we now speak about these vaccines and government measures, and we see now in the Czech cities, we see so-called fighters for freedom and some protests. And for example, 2 days ago, there was a national holiday dedicated to the Students' Day and also the Velvet Revolution, the fall of the communism in Czechoslovakia. And there were organized protests also, like they are fighters for freedom, but as in the past, it was communist totalitarian regime. Now it's the biggest enemy are masks and hidden restaurants and so on. So we see now most strongest narratives against like government measures and masks and so on. And it is followed also with like fear of vaccination, that it will include nanochips, and we will be followed by some secret societies.
Thank you. And Grigory, what has been, or what have been the differences in Slovakia, or what's the situation now in Slovakia?
Yeah, thank you, Bulcu, for introduction, and good morning to everybody. I'm pleased to participate in this event, which is, I would say, the final output of our research activities in this project. And I would like to thank Bulcu, Political Capital, and of course, Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for promotion and implementation of this project, because it gave us better understanding of the situation with the public discourse, with the activities of different political actors in the context of COVID. So if we watch to the situation in Slovakia, and especially to differences between the first and the second wave of pandemic in the context of activities of far-right concerning the COVID, I think that we should take into consideration 2 factors. The first, of course, numbers, which were mentioned. Numbers really increased. and it influences the performance of the government, position of political actors, and perception of the population of the salience of the issue. But even I think that more substantive is that these two different waves in Slovakia coincided in time with different dynamics in political development. The first wave coincided with the change of the government in Slovakia after parliamentary elections. The topic of COVID wasn't almost present in public discourse till the end of February, beginning of March. Of course, the main reason was that Slovakia at that time didn't register any occurrences of COVID, but also these two first months of the year, they were months of pre-election campaign. So there were other topics debated in public discourse and of course very present in political life. So it was a competition between political parties about other issues, and this pandemic only rarely appeared in political discourse. Then the situation, of course, changed after the change of the government. So, and all actors, including these toxic fringe actors, which immediately started to elaborate in the discourse, presenting and promoting narratives. So they somehow had to adjust themselves to the situation. Now the second wave in Slovakia is coincides with very specific situation in which the law enforcement institutions started to present the results of their performance. So investigation, conviction, accusation of some actors in judiciary, and somehow some persons, prominent persons either for right-wing movement or for the former governmental party, currently opposition party Smer, they somehow are figuring, they're figurants of this dynamism. The leader of the fascist party, Marian Kotleba himself, he was sentenced for 4 years in prison. He, of course, protested against, in legal way against the court, against the ruling. So it means that now he is expecting the reconsideration of his case in Supreme Court. But nevertheless, he is now in real danger. As well as some police chiefs, they were arrested, detained, and absolutely clear connection between them and the leadership of Smer party also was disclosed. So now these very important actors in the whole treatment to the COVID, but also in spreading of different kind of narratives, now they are motivated to use this fact that they are endangered in their personal freedoms, somehow to transform this situation in their activities in COVID context. So now they are presenting themselves as a freedom fighters. They are organizing massive public rallies. The last was 2 days ago during the celebration of anniversary of Velvet Revolution. So now they started to present the whole idea that the COVID and the governmental promoted measures against the pandemic is just a tool how to suppress democratic rights, civil liberties, and indirectly they are preparing for situation in which if they will be really legally, of course, and legitimately punished, that they will present this as a repression against their political performance. So this is quite visible in the last weeks when the whole debate about COVID, about treatment of COVID, somehow shifted to this part of public discourse, which is giving to the main disseminator of conspiracy theories and conspiracy narratives in Slovakia, this fascist People's Party of our Slovakia, it gives them additional space for communicating with their voters, opportunity to speak directly to people who, let's say, are frustrated with or because of the implemented governmental measures, sometimes quite understandably criticizing the government for communication, for their quite chaotic approach to the introduction of measures, and to these right-wing extremists, it creates more favorable conditions for spreading their narratives. By the way, these narratives are still present here. I mean, what Bulchu mentioned, enumerated the list of narratives, they are still present in public discourse of Slovakia. Maybe now these narratives related to the socio-political, in quotation mark, advantage of the authoritarian regimes over democracy, they may be now in lower profile. They are still here. So this anti-European narrative is still here. But I mean, still the plenty of narratives in Slovakia, not only the bank, which are more actors in this plot of globalists. It's true that especially Kotleba, it was his favorite topic, how the West and especially foreign financial institutions, banks are trying to buy Slovakia to introduce the regime in which the foreign actors will completely control the whole life of Slovaks. It's still present, but we see also this. I think that's very harmful for the public health narratives about damage which could be done by the vaccination, the full-scale vaccination. That vaccination is just a method how to cheapicize people. Again, right-wing extremists are very visible and more efficient in this communication. And I have to say, and it's probably one of the results of the activities and something which really differentiates the situation in the second and the first wave, that we are following, according to representative opinion polls, how the preparedness of people to accept some measures, let's say vaccinations, for example, lowering. So if in the first wave, according to representative opinion polls, 40% of the population declared their willingness to be vaccinated against COVID, then today, just a couple of weeks ago, the results were published, only 28% of people are awaiting that they will be vaccinated. So it means that we see, of course, the reasons are multiple, but this anti-vaccination propaganda and more active approach of right-wing extremists now to be involved in public activities, I think that they are somehow bringing some fruits, unfortunately.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing the question of vaccination and the openness to vaccination in play, because also in Hungary, we've seen recently a survey which said that the absolute majority of the population, the relative majority of the population doesn't want to be vaccinated against the virus. It's only probably around like 17%, if I have it right in mind, said that they are ready for a vaccine. So also in Hungary, the kind of the openness has become much lower than it used to be. And also, I think it's an interesting fact that you also mentioned that in spring, when the numbers of deaths and also infection numbers were pretty low in our countries, the population followed the rules quite strictly, I think. While we, for instance, in Hungary, we could see that during the summer, when restrictions were eased and people could move freely and also could travel in other countries, the skepticism has increased in Hungary, and in August it was the time when, and also September, when demonstrations took place against restriction measures and also against the virus. So how do you, or what do you think are the reasons for this phenomenon, that when the numbers start to increase in terms of infections, in terms of death, people also start increasingly to be skeptic about the virus.
It is on me?
Yeah.
Okay, so there were mentioned numbers here. Also, Czechs are skeptics for vaccination. About 60, there was a poll about 60% of Czechs, so its majority were skeptic, and the most common answer was they don't trust vaccination in general. Yeah, and also it is interesting that we have like two sides of these skeptics, and some people, they trust only to Russian vaccines, yeah, because on Czech's fake news and pro-Russian website, also Czech edition of Russian state website Sputnik, so they almost every day there are celebrated new Russian miracle medicines and vaccines. Also, Putin said that Russia has already 3 vaccines, but if you find, for example, pictures from the pictures about current situation in Russia, in hospitals, full morgues and so on, so it shows the different pictures than the Russia is successful with vaccines and medicines. So there are people who are they are Czechs and they are like non-critics of Russia. They have full admiration of Russia and their real leader, and they want only Sputnik vaccine, because Western vaccines are of course done to kill you, or there are nanochips and so on.
Well, in our country, if we are comparing situation in the first wave and the second wave in this context of preparedness to be vaccinated, I think that it's partially about psychology, because during the first wave, really we had quite a low number of infected persons or dead. So in August, till August, we had 31 dead persons. But the media picture was very disturbing. So watching TV or just browsing internet, I mean, you can easily reach the terrible pictures of dying people in Spain, in Italy, in France, in the United States. I mean, thousands and thousands of people. And I think that it somehow influenced the people in their consideration that maybe vaccination can be, I mean, good solution. So still, it wasn't the majority, it wasn't the absolute majority, but 40% of people still admitted that if vaccine will be invented and distributed, then they will be vaccinated. Then, as Bulchu, you mentioned, during the summer, it was more or less relaxing time. So the feeling was that this virus is somehow disappearing. People accustomed how to live with the presence of virus, they were more or less abiding the rules and norms. Government relaxed these measures, so people were enjoying this. And maybe in their consideration, these few months of relatively favorable conditions in their psychology in comparison with the March, April, May. And probably they stopped to think about vaccination as a reliable tool for solving their personal life. I don't want to underestimate, of course, also, as Roman said, the proactive tactics of anti-vaccination platforms. And by the way, far right, of course, but other, I mean, this alt-right fringe media outlets and social networks, chats, for example, they're very active. By the way, in the first wave, they were somehow, I don't want to say that they were completely deactivated, but they were confused. They were very surprised by the full scale of the pandemic. And in the first wave, they may be less concentrated on the open and direct anti-vaccination propaganda, but rather promotion of the so-called alternative measures. Yeah, vitamin C, some traditional therapy instead of vaccination, but it wasn't very root anti-vaccination propaganda as it was before. But now gradually they somehow reorganized. They used this narrative about chipization, the narrative about Bill Gates. So also it can influence the decision, or maybe not now decision, but the considerations of people about vaccination. I am not very skeptical on this. We have to wait. We have to wait. Now we see that there are some credible, well-elaborated messages from the mainstream actors, from physicians, from scholars, from some politicians, that which is, I think, increasing the expectation of the positive development concerning the outputs of vaccination, results of the vaccinations. So I think that if the mainstream actors really will challenge these anti-vaccination feelings, that maybe this share of people who are considering vaccination as a good tool for them will increase. I just can mention one practical example from Slovakia. 2-3 weeks ago, the country passed through the testing. Yeah, there were a lot of discussions about the efficiency of this test with just antigen tests, not PCR. So the whole population government prepared this full-scale measure. There were discussions between experts, between politicians, but nevertheless, even with these discussions and even with some conditionality for the people, that it's beneficial for them to pass through this testing. So it means that we have to admit that it wasn't maybe fully voluntarily in an indirect sense. Nevertheless, 3,600,000 people agreed and they participated in testing. So maybe, and I think that few people expected that more than 3 million people voluntarily will come, will wait in queues and will be tested. Even in spite of the propaganda from some far-right or alt-right actors that the testing itself will be used for some harmful operations against the people, taking them DNA or even to install the chips in their body. So my point here is that if government and mainstream actors will start to work systematically with the population, if we will receive the information about positive effects of the vaccination, I hope that the percentage of people who will be more positive to the vaccination will increase.
Thank you. So you actually say that kind of government's communication is key to kind of influence society's attitudes, of course. I was wondering, for instance, in Germany, we have seen some bigger kind of anti-COVID measure demonstrations recently. And we've seen that those people who gathered at these demonstrations were kind of a mixture of some like far-right minded people, but there were also kind of far left-minded people, and there were also a lot of people from kind of the middle of the society. Do you have any data from your countries? Like, what is kind of the composition of those people who are skeptical about the virus, or who are kind of prone to conspiracy theories around the virus? I'm asking because I have a bit the impression that a key effect of the pandemic is that it somehow, or to some extent, kind of mainstreamed conspiracy theories. So some kind of conspiracy theories, like anti-vaccination theories or the 5G, which you, Roman, mentioned, that it was also related and connected to the virus at the beginning. So that some of these conspiracy theories gotten mainstream and got more accepted in societies due to the virus. What do you think about that? Roman?
Well, so when I'm looking at protests, so we have a little bit different situation than, for example, in Slovakia, because these protests are not organized or attended by, for example, member of parliaments or other, let's say, high-level politician. Yeah? And so these members of parliament from the parties using conspiracy theories, so it's like SPD, Party Freedom and Direct Democracy. So they don't go into like deep, hardcore fakes about Bill Gates. Yeah? So they are undermining official statistic data, or they also like discuss who are the patients at hospitals. So we have full hospitals, but a lot of people there, they are without symptoms and so on. This kind of rhetorics, yeah. And also another party using fake news are communists. So they, at the beginning of pandemics, they used these rhetorics to support this Eastern totalitarian regimes, which are our communist sympathetic, and both parties they used anti-EU and anti-democratic rhetoric. But if we see the protests, they are organized by, let's say, civic activists. Some of them they previously organized protests anti-migrants, and they support Russia and Vladimir Putin. Some of them, they were supported from Russian official institution or traveling. They are having no income, no official income, but they are traveling to Russia regularly. They are supported from Russia. And for example, they produce some content for a Russian state or military TV. So this is, but we have also like newcomers of activists, and they are organizing protests. By then they cannot attract like a huge number of people, and the mixture is similar as you mentioned with Germany. So some people are from the like far right scene, some far left, and also there are like, let's say, normal people disappointed with the situation. But there is also one interesting phenomena. If we see these so-called activists, and when we look at the disinformation machine about COVID, yeah, so there were firstly there was like a already established fake news website, and they switch only to this COVID agenda. Then there was a new website and they have used mottos like "Open your mind," "Don't be blind," and they produced or translated some content from famous Dr. Butar or something like that. This kind of videos, and they asked their audience to send money. Yeah? So we are opening your eyes. We are fighting for you against the COVID fraud and so on, but send us the money. And last, these activists in the street organizing protests. So it is also similar because these protests are that you have, also, for example, one woman, and she is hysterically shouting in front of the house of the Ministry of Health. She is shouting about Bill Gates and deep state and chips in vaccines and so on. And she considers herself as like a fighter and defender of the ordinary people. And she is also asking for the money to support her activities. So it is like a scenario here.
Well, Bulcho, you put excellent question, and I would like to know myself the answer to this question, unfortunately, I do not have empirical data in my hand. I do not have these breakdowns. How the supporters of individual parties are responding to this question about vaccination. So I can only indirectly, on the basis of another data, to somehow can elaborate more and maybe guess, who are these people? I mean, in September, almost half of the respondents de facto rejected vaccination. Of course, not all of them are supporters or sympathizers of far right. I mean, Kotleba's party gained in the last elections 8%. So it means that not only supporters of this kind of politics are among the vaccine resistor. And also, if we look to the situation with support of conspiracy theories, the support for conspiracy theories is even higher in the Slovak population, according to opinion poll conducted by Global Policy Institute. In the last survey, 56% of Slovaks somehow confess or believe in different kind of conspiracy. So it means that it's a mixture. It's a mixture of people. Of course, the share of those who are holders or maybe disseminators of these theories, either conspiracy theories or attitude to vaccination, I mean, suspicious that vaccination is a tool of global control, definitely is higher among supporters of those parties which are using some contents or which are including in their credo some contents like distrust to democracy, distrust to liberal values, less trust to the West, resistance to, let's say, integration, European integration, resistance of multiculturalism, rather pro-Russian than pro-Western orientation. So it means that this kind of people, I think that they are more concentrated among supporters of either Kotleba's party, but maybe today even among Smer parties or Robert Fico's party and some other maybe less politically relevant but radical nationalist formations. But also you can find these people among those who are not supporters of radical politics, but situationally, I mean, they are frustrated, for example, in the last weeks, either from the improper way of communication of the government, how they perceive this communication, that they do not understand, I mean, what government wants from them, which measures are valid, which measures are already invalid. Some measures were announced, but they were introduced. So it means it's a bit messy situation for the understanding of what is happening. And these people also are among those who are either now protesting against the government, indirectly, by the way, of course, supporting by these extremists, because they are appearing on their rallies. So it means that it creates the feeling that now extremists are gaining, they are, winning in this battle of political narratives of battling among the mainstream actors and this so-called fringe. But don't forget that Kotleba's party, they are fringe in terms of their credo, but they are politically very relevant force. They are second time in the parliament, so it's a very well-established political formation. They are standard from the point of view of party organization. They have structures, they have committed membership, they have committed electorate, they are using media, they are very active online in different platforms, but also offline. They are communicating with their voters. So it means that what they are now trying to do, they are trying to gain some additional support. Maybe not only from the reservoir of the typical electorate of radical parties, but also people who are hesitating. Even I think, I was following this rally on Tuesday during the anniversary of Velvet Revolution, and I saw some usual suspects among the core of the people who are I mean, in these rallies, but also I saw normal, ordinary people. Of course, I have to be open. I mean, if they came to this manifestation, they expressed their sympathy. I think that maybe not all of them, but many, the vast majority of them, they knew that they are coming to the demonstration organized by fascists, by Kotleba. It was publicized. So it means that somehow they tolerated this, which is not, of course, good sign for them, and also, which is probably even more important, that they openly violated the regulation. They violated the principle of law. So now it was a very, I mean, bad sign. So it also showed, and Kotleba and extremists showed to the government they can mobilize people who are not abiding the norms, even if they are not supporters, direct supporters of them. So just to finish, yeah, it was a mixture of people. There were some contents which were unifying them. Reasons for the protest and reasons for resistance to vaccination probably were different in different categories, but there were some unifying factors which I just tried to describe.
Thank you so much. We are receiving great questions, but before turning to these questions and answer the questions from the audience, I have one last question. Please try to be brief. We've spoken about we've spoken a lot about conspiracy theories, and we also have spoken about how key is the reaction to these narratives, and what's the role of authorities and governments to deal and counter these conspiracy theories and to influence the society's attitudes, for instance, towards vaccination. Have you seen, or what kind of approaches have you seen in your countries from the side of governments, authorities, to counter conspiracy theories? We know that, for instance, in the Czech Republic, you have quite a good chain of institutions monitoring, analyzing Russian disinformation, for instance, and also countering Russian disinformation. So speaking also about Russian disinformation, but like more generally about all these conspiracy narratives, yeah, what kind of approaches, have you seen any kind of best practices in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia? How governments can influence or counter these harmful narratives?
Okay, maybe I can start, or Roman? Okay.
Yes, you can.
By saying that, I mean, from this point of view, we are in more favorable situation than before elections, because now we have the government. It's a government composed by mainstream political actors. Of course, it's quite heterogeneous mixture. It's a mixed composition of the coalition. And they are not adherent of conspiracy theories. We can maybe find some individual persons, maybe in one party, via family, but none from this party are systematically working with the conspiracy narratives which can be harmful today. So it means that the main message from the government, which is coming to the population, is that people should abide the norms and measures implemented on the basis of credible knowledge, so scientific findings, and be prepared for specific anti-epidemic measures like vaccination. So government is pro-vaccination. Government is nevertheless stressing that it will be voluntarily, which I think that it can be discussed. I think that now we are in a situation in which government can be more strict in this, but they are not spreading the conspiracies. They are in favor of credible measures, and they are creating space inside the public administration for debunking these toxic narratives. I know that there is a special department at Ministry of Health, which is very important, which is debunking the coming either fake news, hoaxes, or toxic contents related to medical measures. So they are, I mean, this department in media, they are very proactive. Then, of course, there are some organizational units in other public administration institutions, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, which are also working with maybe in the broader agenda of toxic content, not inevitably connected to COVID, but all this toxic content coming, I would say, from the hostile states or toxic actors, even in friendly states. So I see that maybe as an expert, I could expect more efficient approach, but again, I have quite a big deal of understanding of non-trivial situation now. So, the good practices also are activities of independent media. They are, I think, that's very important because they are delivering the main messages, and individual NGOs or scholars which are engaging in this debate, they're publishing their articles, they're communicating with the audience, and I think that it has its own effect also.
Thank you.
Okay, in the Czech Republic, you know, so we went through this fake news period about COVID, and also there was by official institution there were provided like a debunking and published like a list of narratives and conspiracies, and it was also communicated to the public. But together with this, so we saw some tips on Facebook, like eat garlic. It will defend you against COVID. Yeah. So there were official institutions also published this and communicated this information, debunking this like a folk recommendation, or how to name it, like eat garlic, drink alcohol, smoke, it will defend you against COVID. Yeah? So it was also connected with the debunking of this like a common myths, but there were also spread on social networks hoaxes. Some yeah. So it was similar, like there is a bomb at school, yeah? But it was about the stories were something like, I have a friend and she works at the ministry, and she got information that tomorrow will be closed all the shops. Yeah, buy everything now. And then thousands of shares on Facebook, panic, and so on. So it was also a criminal issue, like because we have in our criminal law, we have paragraph about sharing of hoax, yeah, and this hoax means something which is not true, and it can be risk for the public. So, but nowadays, fake news and disinformation about COVID, it is also priority for government and official institutions to fight fake news and disinformation. Yeah? And there is a new project from the Office of the Government about new communication campaign, and we have a new website more friendly to ordinary people, explaining the situation. But I'm not sure if this information will or can penetrate the group of people fully trusting that behind this pandemic is a Bill Gates who wants to kill us or control us or something like that. Yeah, and in the Czech Republic, we have about a quarter of people trusting more to this so-called traditional media and supporting the various conspiracy theories.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pick the questions from the audience. we have a question asking about the narratives of the countries regarding vaccination coming from or produced by Western pharmaceutical companies versus vaccination or vaccines produced by Russia, China, or other countries, or kind of more autocratic countries. Do you see like what kind of narratives, what kind of communications can you see in the Czech Republic and Slovakia about this issue?
I already mentioned it. Yeah. So there is a huge group of people denying vaccination, but if we look at this division of Western vaccines and Russian vaccines, yeah, so they are non-critical admirer of Russia and Vladimir Putin, and it's not such a small group. Yeah, so they see the West as a core of all evil, yeah, including vaccines, medicines, and so everything is fraud from the West. Yeah, everything is fraud and aggressive, and they want to kill us. And Russian is portrayed as only like a normal freedom country, and with a strong leader caring of his people, and his peacekeeping and so on. So he couldn't produce something like Western vaccines. And if we look at the Sputnik website, so we saw a lot of articles about new Russian miracle medicines and also vaccines and so on. So it is attempt to portray Russia like a clever country fighting for interest of our people, and who cannot do something like Western vaccines and these evil societies who want only to destroy us. Yeah, so there are two types. So there are people denying vaccination, but there are also quite big group of people trusting to fake news websites, pro-Russian website, and they are saying if vaccination, it means only Russian because Western is bad.
Well, I think that the fact that Russia offered its own vaccine, I mean, created quite strange situation for anti-vaccinations platforms in Slovakia also. I mean, 100% of these anti-vaccination platforms, they are pro-Russian. But now the situation changed and it confused them. So, but I think that they are still more against the vaccination than presenting the positive effects of the Russian vaccine, because it would, I mean, completely deny their credo. By the way, I think that they are not informed very much about state vaccination policy in Russia, which is quite strict. I mean, they couldn't expect that, that Russia will support anti-vaccination activities inside itself. No way for this. I mean, Russia is developing this vaccine really in order to vaccinate completely all the population. We still don't know how it will be officially organized, but I wouldn't be surprised if Russian state will introduce the obligatory vaccination against COVID. I think it has logical. It's absolutely in full line with the state vaccination policy in Soviet Union, and it was inherited by Russia. But what is quite interesting, at least my empirical experience, is that Slovak far right is not promoting the Russian Sputnik vaccine. There are some platforms, of course. I mean, pro-Russian platforms, not so radical, not so extremist as, let's say, Kotleba's party. So yes, there is a kind of competition between efficiency of the vaccines according to them. But frankly, I didn't register any occurrence. Maybe I wasn't enough maybe I didn't put enough attention, but I do not remember that, I mean, some leaders of Kotleba's party, that they presented Russian vaccine as a better option for the vaccination. They are against vaccination as such. And, but however, they have some maybe room for this, for change of their mind and their approach, that I'm just elaborating that the Western vaccine can be used for cheapization, and the Russian vaccine is absolutely safe from this point of view. So I can imagine that they probably will use this kind of narrative, but we have to be realistic. I don't think that this option is viable and possible. I mean, vaccination of Russian vaccine in Slovakia. I know the Slovak government already contracted a big number of vaccines together with other EU member states. So it's very 99%, maybe 100% that if vaccination will be done, it will be vaccination by the Western, either this Pfizer or maybe Moderna or maybe Oxford vaccines.
Thank you. We have another question asking about possible influences of Donald Trump's anti-scientific approach on our country's, society's attitudes towards vaccination or towards the pandemic. So do you see any kind of correlation, or probably that Donald Trump has kind of mainstreamed anti-scientific approaches and views? Does it have, or has that had an influence? Has it helped, for instance, conspiracy theories around the world, especially in our countries, to mainstream anti-virus narratives?
Of course, topic of American election resonated in the Czech Republic, yeah. And Donald, as we see from a long-term perspective, that narrative is also that the pandemic is fraud, it's a fake, and so on. And one popular message was that Donald Trump will stop this fake pandemic on 4th of November. So one day after the election. So it means when he will be re-elected again. So he will stop this pandemic fraud, and if Biden will be elected, it will continue. Yes? So the Czech conspiracy scene, and we saw it from the poll also, that Trump was supported from in the group of supporters of SPD party. It's Okamura's party, this anti-EU and anti-migrants party, using fake news. And so they projected something into Donald Trump, that he can say only like stop this fraud and so on. And with Biden, this so-called fraud will continue.
Well, the whole so-called alt-right environment in Slovakia, they supported election of Donald Trump. So they are, I would say, spontaneous Trumpists. And of course, they know that Trump is COVID skeptic. Yeah, so he is not the brutal denier of COVID as they are. But nevertheless, his position to treatment of COVID is closer to them, and definitely he is appearing in these websites. And by the way, not only Trump, but in our research, when we monitored the appearance of different types of narratives and actors cited in Slovak anti-vaccination or disinformation, misinformation conspiracy platforms, they gave the space for American conspiracy theorists like David Icke, for example, some other persons. So I think that indirectly, of course, the situation in the United States is giving certain portion of energy for them, for disseminators. How it really affects directly the people, the ordinary people in their treatment to COVID, I think that maybe not in the most massive manner, but definitely it's one of the factors. It's one of the factors which gives the credit to these disseminators, the credit that look important persons, world leaders like Donald Trump have these positions, and we should somehow also take into consideration. So it means that they are trying to mainstream themselves, identifying with some positions, not only Donald Trump, but also with Donald Trump. And I think that now it's just my intuition, but I think I'm not very far from the truth, that these people, they are keeping their fingers crossed to Donald Trump to win these elections.
Thank you. We have some specific questions regarding Hungary and also a specific question to Grigory. But before these questions, there is one more general question, which is about whether there has been any increase in the support of far-right or fringe parties. Have you seen, like, as a consequence of mainstreaming these such harmful narratives and like spreading these conspiracy theories, have like popular support of far-right or fringe parties increased in the countries?
Very simple answer, no. In Slovakia, Kotleba's party is still on their traditional level of support, 8-9%, no more, I think. So far, they didn't benefit in this measurable parameter. But as I said, the COVID pandemic and especially this new dynamism created more favorable conditions for them to communicate with a broader audience. And we will see the results.
And in the Czech Republic, so there is no also shifting towards to this radical parties. So there are changes on the political landscape, but it is not about these radical parties, and it is mostly, let's say, shifting towards from the government parties towards opposition parties. So opposition has higher preferences now than before.
That's interesting, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I think naturally we could see a kind of gather around the flag effect that like in most countries, governing parties, ruling parties increased their popularity because, of course, people followed measures of the governments and, of course, followed the official communications. Has it changed since then in the second wave? You mentioned, Roman, that opposition parties have increased their popularity in the Czech Republic, for instance.
Yes, so there are, you mentioned these two waves, and during the first wave, we went very well, so it increased the popularity or stabilized popularity, or the popularity had the same numbers, or popularity of government or support for the government. But the second wave, it was worse about numbers, victims. It was worse for medical workers and so on. So, and this popularity, as I said, is not shifting towards radicals, but you know, it's about the biggest criticism for the government is that they did not applied the measures earlier, that that we went into higher numbers. Yeah, so that was a criticism. You should do something earlier. We should close schools and I don't know what much earlier to prevent these higher numbers and victims.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Slovakia now we see the certain reshuffling on political scene. So Kotleba's party is still on the same level, as I said, but one of the parties, a leader of which is skeptical formation, Smer. I'm speaking about Smer because Robert Fico is definitely COVID skeptic. This party is losing. It's not inevitably connected with the COVID situation. This party is now in opposition. They are under huge pressure from these cases, investigated cases. So in spite of their COVID skeptical agenda, they are losing. But other party is benefiting. It's the Smer 2.0. It's official name. The official name is Voice, Hlas Social Democracy, and they are taking some voters from Smer, and maybe it's just my guess. It's a party led by Peter Pellegrini, the former prime minister, and maybe some of these people, they still remember how efficient, in quotation mark, how efficient Peter Pellegrini was in the first wave of COVID, when it was very short, maybe 10 days when government was finishing their tenure, but really they were introducers. So the previous outgoing government introduced the first measures. And Pellegrini, he was communicating, I have to admit, better than Igor Matovic. I mean, the real practical efficiency was that time, I think, very low. It was good that the measures were introduced very quickly, but maybe for part of the current supporters of Pellegrini still is something relevant. So they remember that he started to fight against COVID in a more understandable manner. This party is not so radical as Smer, so they're presenting their human face of Smer. So, but it's just my consideration. It's for a longer discussion about among the specialists on Slovak politics.
Okay, thank you, Grigory and Roman. And now the kind of special questions I mentioned, Grigory, there is a question for you, is about, I read it out. The main scene for spreading disinformation about COVID-19 is the social media, but some strong voice influencers on Facebook responded strongly against the disinformation spreaders and far-right activists and made jokes about them. Did this activity have some effect? Did it strengthen the core of the responsible people in Slovakia against fake news and far-right activism? What do you think? So the question, so the question actually refers to what we also discussed a bit, counter approaches against harmful narratives. It's especially about like the Slovak situation, whether the response of mainstream actors, like making jokes about disinformation spreaders and far-right activists, like such approaches have proved to be successful in Slovakia.
Yeah, I see that it's a question from Mark Finta, who is a journalist from WISO Daily. Yeah, I think it's a good example. I mentioned the activities of independent media, some NGOs, and this platform, it's very, it's very humorous platform. And I remember how you guys in Political Capital, one of your recommendations was to ridicule those who are spreading bad things, not only to criticize them, in manner, so about the matters, but also to create ironic attitude to them. And this Zomri platform, its Facebook platform, it's really a good example how the committed, active citizens can resist to these toxic and very harmful contents and narratives. It's one example. Another example is it's a platform in Daily SME, the Cynical Beast, which is, it's a bit different. ironizing, but I mean, the goal is the same. So to ridicule these people who are really harmful for the country in this humorous, and to present their points in a humorous manner.
Thank you. At the end, there is some questions dedicated to Hungary. I will try to very briefly answer this question. So there is a question about how the anti-China narrative functions in Hungary, or how weak or strong is this narrative. I would say that the anti-China narrative is very, very limited in Hungary. It might be related to the fact that there is a kind of pretty strong relationship between the Chinese and Hungarian governments, and also Hungary received a lot of aid from China. And so the conspiracy theory about, for instance, about like China spreading the virus, or Chinese are spreading the virus, and that, or any other kind of anti-China narratives, like related also to the vaccination, the Chinese vaccination. It's rather kind of almost, I would say, it's almost inexistent in Hungary. And also there's a question about the Hungarian government's vaccine strategy, like whether it prefers the Russian or the Chinese vaccine to other vaccines. I can say that the Hungarian government has kind of a broad strategy, and the main aim of the Hungarian government, I think, is kind of the aim of all the governments, to have a vaccine as soon as possible. And the government says that it equally looks at the vaccines which are being developed in all of the countries, and would like to secure the vaccine from any sources which prove to be safe. And also there's a question about Hungary to compare the government's responses between the first and the second wave. To this question, I can briefly say that, as it was mentioned in terms of Slovakia and Czech Republic, also in Hungary, the anti-EU narrative has become a bit more limited. However, I would say that we can expect that this narrative will increase now because of the Hungary's veto on the European Union's budget and the rule of law conditionality. So we can expect a very strong anti-EU narrative coming, and also it will also be probably related to the pandemic, and that the EU doesn't really help its member states, and instead it only attacks them. This is kind of the official narrative now of the Hungarian government. A narrative which has been remained with us, and it's probably also increasing in the anti-opposition narrative, or more broadly the anti-democratic narrative. So the Hungarian government, as it did it during the first wave, also we expect in the second wave the Hungarian government will use its powers to broaden its or to weaken kind of democratic institutions. We have seen some signs already. For instance, a new amendment to the constitution was proposed by the government, limiting the rights of the LGBTQ community, and also there is an amendment to the election legislation. So we can expect some more steps in this direction. Speaking more broadly, we also seen in Hungary that the virus skepticism has increased during the summer, and I would say there are still many people who are skeptical about the virus. And interestingly, in Hungary, the far right hasn't really played a very huge role in disseminating harmful narratives and conspiracy theories. They have spoken about these narratives, and of course, they kind of believe all in the conspiracy theories that are around us and that are kind of usual in all our countries. But the far right in Hungary hasn't really been very loud on this. So that was kind of a very brief summary of the situation in Hungary. And with this, if Roman and Grigory or Tony, if you have any kind of thoughts, then please go on. Otherwise, I will close our session. And thank you very much to you all for being with us. I will very much thank you to our partners, Roman and Grigory, and also the Polish partners for supporting us with the research and cooperating with us in this project. And also, of course, a huge thanks to Tony and to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom for supporting our project and for being with us and supporting us as well during these times. And lastly, also, we very much appreciate the interest of the audience and very much thank all the people who joined us today for your interest in our research and in our discussion. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will launch the report or publish the report soon in, I suppose, in the coming 1 or 2 weeks, the latest. And we then, of course, will send you the report to your email addresses with which you register for the event. So thank you so much for being with us today and have a nice day and be safe.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.